Okay, so we are now beginning our meeting for May 28th, 2020. This is a Windsor Unified School District Special Budget Workshop, the second meeting we've had on this topic. There will be future meetings to come as well. I would like to welcome everybody to the meeting and offer a few suggestions to allow you to realize that if you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube, that we are not currently monitoring those sites. We do have people that could pass along messages, but those of us that are in the Zoom meeting are not able to see any of your comments and not able to participate in discussion based on what your comments are during the meeting. So at this time, if we could have a roll call, please.
President Heights.
Here.
Vice President Ahmad.
Here.
Trustee Adams.
Here.
Trustee Carnation.
Here.
Trustee Valenzuela.
Here.
Student Board Member Anna Whiteley.
Here.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I would like to, there are some public comments that have been sent in. I'm not going to read all of them, but I will make mention to a few of the names and some of the issues that are being considered.
Eric, do we have to do a flag salute?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, that wasn't on my list here. Yes, let's go ahead and do a flag salute. Would you like to lead us, George?
Sure. Put your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks.
Thank you for reminding us about that. I was just going down the list of the agenda, and I didn't remember to see that it wasn't on our agenda list. So again, I'll get back to a few of the public comments that were sent in previous to the meeting. I will make mention to the different things that have been sent in ahead here. There is a note from Marie Gannister, who is a teacher at the high school, asking that we try to do the best we can to keep the CTE budget intact. And we'll follow up with that during the meeting. I have a message sent to the Board of Trustees from Amanda Dunbar regarding concerns about distance learning for the upcoming school year. We will, later in the meeting, be addressing a little bit of that, and there'll be more information to follow in future meetings. This meeting's mostly about budget, but we will be having some very serious future meetings and discussions at the county level and the district level regarding distance learning. I also received a similar letter from, let me scan down to get the name, Robin Fletcher, who's a parent of a student in the district. And again, they're concerned with the financial crisis, as well as what the cuts should be, how the national crisis is the COVID epidemic, and we're not getting the support we need from the federal government and the state government. And we want to try to mobilize and demand more funding for the school district. I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but that's the gist of her letter. I have a public comment from Jill Ziegler Cooper, a teacher and Windsor resident, regarding the gathering of input from stakeholders, talking about not wanting to lay anybody off, spending down our reserves, selling the surplus property and using the funds for salaries, and calmly and steadily planning during this time of struggle for us. Those were the four public comments I had that came in earlier. If there are more public comments, we can address them later in the meeting potentially, and we will look forward to getting more feedback from the community and from the people here at the meeting and that are watching on Facebook and on YouTube. At this time, are there any adjustments to the agenda? We mostly have just one item, but if anybody had something they needed to change, I'm not seeing or hearing about any.
I would
Please.
President Heights, I would like to add something. It is with great sadness that we recognize this evening the death of one of our students, a Windsor Middle School student. Diego Rivas passed recently, and I just wanted to make sure we had a moment of silence to recognize this student and to send our condolences and our sincere wishes of comfort to his family at this time.
Thank you all for your thoughts and prayers for the family and for the community of Windsor and Rio Neto, where he was a citizen. And we'll find more evidence and more information in the future, but it's always difficult to lose someone so young, especially in an accidental situation that we believe this is. So not a great way to start our meeting, but necessary to support the family and the community. At this time, we'll move on to item 3.1, which is our budget workshop. We're going to consider current information and adjustments for the 2021 school year and beyond. Prior to having Dr. Kruger and his staff present the meeting, I would like to offer this opportunity to the trustees that are interested to make a comment prior to opening the discussion. So Trustee Adams, do you have a comment you'd like to make?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Dr. Kruger, for those gracious remarks about our student. I appreciate we have just a tidal wave of information that has come in over the last week or so. And I just wanted to sort of shape, we're not going to go in, or I'm not going to go into particular ideas or approaches, but to recognize that I doubt today we are going to be making decisions about budget adjustments. I think we'll raise more questions than we answer. And I very much hope that we can get a very clear path forward on our meetings and the timing of those meetings between now, when we hear what the state budget is approved by the legislature 2 weeks from Monday on June 15th, what we do after that, and then also the pivot to whatever action planning and implementation we have when Mr. Decker comes in as our new superintendent on July 1st, and would ask that when we get to the end of the meeting, we don't leave without getting a clear set of the several more workshops and meetings that we very likely need to have to make these decisions. So I'll have comments about other pieces of the presentation, but I want to say thank you particularly to Lois and the team. This is very, very difficult. And we're working on a very fast schedule with changing and incomplete information. That said, we must get a 3-year budget done by the end of June. It can be adjusted later, but we have to have a 3-year budget that comes to the lower right-hand corner with a particular number to be positive. And that's really the objective, in my view, as we work on program and policy priorities. So thank you, President Heights.
Yes, Trustee Ahmad, would you like to make a comment prior to beginning?
Yes, I would. So when a letter went out earlier today explaining the impact that the full extent of the budget cuts would have on our school district. And in that letter, there was a reference to contact Senator McGuire's office to express any concerns. And the senator actually wanted to clarify for our community that his office is actively opposing those cuts and has been working to oppose them kind of pretty tirelessly over the last few days. So the intent is for a collaborative effort between our district and Senator McGuire's office, and that's what the plan has been and the intent. So the intent of the letter was not to insinuate that our district has a different position than our local representative. So I just wanted to clarify that at the beginning of this meeting. So if you do reach out and you support not cutting the budget, I would encourage you to, if you do reach out to Senator McGuire, to just encourage him to keep up what he's already doing. And that's pretty much all.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Carnation, did you have anything you'd like to say that's before we begin?
No, I'm pretty good. At Stephanie and Bill covered both things. I'm ready to start looking at all these things and digesting the information and starting to figure out how we're going to do the best with what we have.
Okay, and Trustee Valenzuela, would you like to make a comment tonight, or?
Basically, in Lois's presentation, if she could discuss the alternative, which is brought up by some community members, which is to do nothing, to say to Sacramento, no, we're not going to make any cuts, and what the outcome of that would be. I think we as trustees know what the outcome is, but I think that should be a scenario that she should cover. That way the public knows that even though we don't want to make cuts, cuts are going to have to happen. Those are my comments.
Okay, and I'll finish up with just a short mention myself. I did receive a note that it came in just now that we also have a public comment from Crystal Hollingsworth. I can't access the comments at this time with the screen that I have available. It wasn't shared with me perfectly, but we will acknowledge those, and I'll write back to her with information if she's watching tonight. Hopefully your questions can be answered and your comments are approved that way. I would like to again remind everybody that while we're on Facebook Live and YouTube channel, that we here on Zoom do not see your comments. And I would also like to make mention that there's a lot of kind of discussions on social media, Windsor Parents on Facebook and different groups that are a part of the community. Make sure you understand that we are not just taking this lightly whatsoever. This hits all of us very hard. We cannot just make a small cut a little bit. We have to make drastic cuts if the funding stays as is proposed right now. And so, there's been discussions about why don't we just pay the superintendent less, or why don't we, cut one or two little things. It's much more broad than that. It's basically 10% of our entire budget they're asking us to trim. And our budget was already too short or too small from what we needed to fund everything we like to do. So while those things are proposals and while those things are possible, we have to look a lot deeper than that. And this is the most difficult part of the job for me. I don't want to do any cuts at all, but as George mentioned, Lois will give the opportunity to share with us what happens if we don't make cuts and don't have a positive budget for the next 3 years. So hearing those comments from the trustees, I'd like to open it up to Dr. Kruger and his staff to begin our agenda and go through the information.
Yes. So as long as I'm not muted. So I have here our agenda for this evening. I'm not going to read it, but I've had it up there so we can get a sense of where we're going this evening. Why are we here? I think that opening comments from trustees and the information we've shared over the past several meetings, including part one of this workshop last week, is that we're faced with a situation where we are acting upon projections that have not yet been confirmed. We are looking at what do we do to prepare for information that is as dire as we've been presented with so far when the governor releases his budget on June 15th. So we're taking responsible efforts to be prepared for anything, and this will get better over time, but we have to prepare for the worst until we get the best information. We don't know when this will get better, but we do know that there are a lot of forces working in a positive way towards making impacts on public education in the state of California, and specifically we're talking about Windsor Unified School District. We're doing the best we can with the information that we have, and I really want to make sure we do this in a methodical and phased in way. And so the layers we're going to be considering, and as Lois takes us through the updated possibilities, we're looking at the 4 layers in front of you: pre-COVID considerations to really address our deficit spending that we had anyway, anticipated funding reductions based on the state budget, additional funding factors and timelines that we want to make sure we're clearly going over, so everyone understands what our compliance timelines are, as well as our practical timelines. And then there's a consideration that has gotten much more, I guess, enlightened in the last several days through my budget questions at WUSD.org, which I will go over. But there's more and more concern about, and we do need to think about, what will schools look like in the fall. So our intended outcomes are to have all of the updates and information presented and discussed. We want to be able to give the board more options for review and consideration so that we're prepared, and Lois has a budget to present on June 16th at the initial hearing. And then the updated timeline is understood and accepted. So I'm going to start with direction I was given at the last meeting to gather information from stakeholders. First of all, I want to express my appreciation to CSEA, to WDEA, to administrators, to parents, to community members and partners for weighing in and for sending in responses. I have been, since Friday, I have been charting the responses so that I can gather the most significant input, which consisted of 3 different levels or layers. One is comments and questions are in the process of being answered, but a lot of the questions came in a way that they implied a suggestion for a revenue source or for a possible consideration for a budget adjustment. I will quickly share, just so people can see. I'm going to switch here. Is that visible? No. Share screen. Give me one moment. So just a basic overview. So far, as of today at noon, there was 1 student response, 14 parents, 23 classified staff, 8 certificated, 9 administrative, and 4 board and or community members. And so basically, I've been organizing the information with feedback and or questions. And this is the focus feedback that has come in just as general ideas. There was a lot of appreciation for the opportunity to provide input. And also, as we've talked about earlier, there's an opposition to all cuts and a real movement to make sure that people know that we're not in that pretty much the scenario George referred to as the say no concept, which isn't a possibility at this time, but it's something we can talk about. So I won't go through each of these, but there are definitely some common themes that are being expressed. I'm continuing to, I've received since last evening, I've received 11 more emails on my budget questions. So it's going to be a running document that I continue to share with trustees so that you, if there's new information that comes in, a lot of it is repeated. And so that's how it ended up here, because it's a common interest or suggestion. So then I moved to suggestions for potential income opportunities. I also want to mention we did get a comment and a positive recognition for holding the community conversations a year and a half ago around the elementary reconfiguration. And I have saved all of the comments and suggestions from those, which are pretty similar to these. So I can forward that to the board as well for reference. But as far as income, there are ideas about fundraising and about revenue generating items, looking at fundraisers for the general fund, continuing to explore public-private partnerships, and using one-time sources, and was a theme that came up often, as well as leasing the Windsor Creek property. And then finally, we do have quite a list of suggestions that have come in for consideration: tightening staffing ratios, class size sorts of information. We have consider positions and department structures, possible combinations of departments, discontinuing consultants. Many of these things actually have ended up on our possible list. So I'm just going to leave this up for a second so people can go through it. I can also add it to the board docs so that it can be there as a reference as well. So I'm going to move on. And so what should we prepare for now? So there are two things that have been in deep consideration right now, and one was a request. One is, what do we look like in the fall? And then the other question is, and a request from the board at the last meeting, was a review of the summer certificated layoff process, so that if we get the information that indicates we need to make some additional changes to classified staff, including administrators, that we understand what that process and timeline looks like. So what I'd like to do right now is just give Lisa Saxon an opportunity to briefly go over for the viewers what it is that we're looking at as we continue on the path of planning for what the fall might look like. Lisa?
Sure, thanks, Brandon. So as most of you know who have been following the media and Tony Thurman's information, et cetera, we basically are looking down the road at 3 potential scenarios for opening up school for the 2021 school year. The first would be, should the COVID shelter-in-place restrictions stay, we would remain in a virtual distance learning environment with some additional add-ons and changes to the grading rubric and the structure of how it would roll out. The hold harmless would be different in the fall. The second opportunity would be a hybrid model where students with social distancing guidelines in place would attend classes on some days and remain in a distance learning platform for other days. Excuse me. The third would be in the event that all COVID-19 social distancing protocols are lifted and we're able to return to a traditional face-to-face environment that we left on March 13th. So those are the 3 options that we have in front of us currently. We're monitoring daily, hourly on what the news seems to be, and planning to flesh out plans and scenarios for, well, the 2 new ones. We know how to do face-to-face, thankfully, but the hybrid and remaining on distance learning and how that might look moving forward. That is inclusive of, I want to add, the feedback that we received from parents and staff regarding the recent survey that went out. So thank you for that input. It's a piece of information that helps give us feedback and input regarding the perception of our own stakeholders with regards to how we should roll out the 2021 school year and follow the CDC, State of California, and Sonoma County Health guidelines.
If I could chime in, thank you, Lisa. Some of what may have to be considered as well is if we do end up having traditional face-to-face learning, it still may have some restrictions where students may need to have a temperature check, or we may need to do extra cleaning between classes, or we may need to have some classes that don't happen traditionally, like PE or lab classes where students cannot be touching the same equipment at the same time. So even though we do know how to do the face-to-face, as you mentioned, that's a great way to say it, it will still be a little different potentially. And we need to budget for those things as well. That won't be free. So we have to consider, can we provide masks and other PPEs? Do we need to have more custodial staff? Do we need to have more nursing availability? Things like that. So just an extra little bit that is on the table for how we can possibly come back in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Eric. I'm glad you brought that up. I wasn't sure we wanted to launch into the budget piece, but since you went there, yes, it is true that even in a 100% face-to-face, there may be some restrictions in place. In addition to that, what we now know without fleshing out complete details, but it's very clear just from cursory information that a hybrid model, should we return to that model, will cost a significant amount of money to be able to implement and keep social distancing protocols in place. You mentioned temperature checking. Yes, Eric, PPE equipment, I'm assuming we can get it. And just the supervision piece of it and keeping everybody 6 feet apart will present some challenges. The sanitizing of desks, et cetera, lunch distribution. There's a lot to be thought out that will include additional needs for funding in order to successfully pull that model off.
Eric, yesterday at our joint meeting with the town, you alluded briefly to the Coalition of School Board Presidents, which has been convened, as I understood your comments, by your counterpart, Lori Fong, down in Santa Rosa. Could you just share for those people who are watching what that reopening and that connection, so that people are aware that beyond just our own district, you're concurrently working with our colleagues throughout the county?
Yes, I just recently have spoken with her and done emails back and forth since last night's meeting, of course. And I will be reaching out to the trustees after we're done here. But on Monday at 7 o'clock, there's a Zoom meeting for all school board presidents and trustees that are interested in attending as well. It does not violate the Brown Act because it's an open meeting. And so what that will be is information on how we can potentially go back to school in the fall, and not just information that the governor gives us, and not just information that the County Office of Education gives us, but what we all need to do together to be on the same kind of a page. Petaluma City Schools, Roanoke Park, Toddy, Windsor, Santa Rosa City Schools, a lot of the larger districts will all be in attendance at that meeting. And just basically a review of what our possibilities are and what we can manage, and how is the distance learning model working for us now, and how will it be different in the fall if we choose to or have to stay with that. And so there's an hour-and-a-half meeting planned on a Monday afternoon and evening that we're invited to, and there'll be more information to follow, of course. And then on June 10th, I think it is, if I remember correctly, Dr. Steve Harrington, the Sonoma County Office of Education Superintendent, is hosting a meeting as well on the same topic that will be for all districts and for all employees, and for everybody to attend if interested, on what the county is doing and what the County Office of Health is doing, and how we can proceed as we get closer to the fall. We keep saying that it's always so far away, but in reality, it's only 2 months now. And we need to be prepared ahead of time. We can't just wait until the week before to put some of these things in place. So thank you to Lori Fong and the Santa Rosa City School Board for initiating this. They're meeting tonight to go over some of this, and we'll have some more follow-up on Monday.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Lisa. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to move to Chris Canelake, Director of HR, to briefly take us through the requested timeline of anticipated summer certificated layoffs.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully trustees have had a chance to look at the attachment that's in their that's on this board item today. But I can give you a sort of a nutshell version of what the process is. There are things that we've been working closely with school and college legal services, attended their seminar, and are working closely with Carl Corbin and Caitlin Schwindeman. But the things that need to be in place now is that we have to have our seniority lists in order, which we do. Credentials and assignments for all of our certificated staff also need to be in order. Our list of temporary employees needs to be reviewed and to be sure that they are actually legally temporary. And we feel really good that all of that is in place and ready. It's very similar to what we did in March for the reduction in force that we did at that time. The next step is to develop our PKS layoff, and that is sort of TBD, because it really depends on what the board recommends and the administration moves towards. So there is that step is, of course, what we're sort of in the process of discussing. We have been discussing and will be discussing in the future. And that PKS resolution will be prepared based on the results of what we're doing in this budget process.
If I could interject a second, Chris, I'm sorry.
Sure.
So PKS is particular kind of services, and that would be if we decided to reduce a certain topic where a person is credentialed in that area only. Could you mention that, please?
Yes. So in other words, the idea of particular kinds of services gives the board and the school district the latitude to, rather than just say we're cutting 1% of our credentialed teaching force and then going from there. This gives us the ability to say there's a certain subject area, a certain credential area, a certain administrative position. So it's much more specific, not necessarily to a person, but to a particular kind of service, hence PKS. Is that clarification you're looking for? Great. So, and as the board recalls, we did that this March for the normal. It's normally an annual cycle that begins in March, and we also included in that a skipping and a tie-breaking resolution, and both of those resolutions help the school district be really clear about certain individuals that might need to be skipped in the process of actual layoffs based on certain credentials or training that we've invested in and are critical to the district's operation. And then the tie-breaking procedure also gives us the latitude to when there are ties in seniority, the latitude to look at other qualities, credentials, whatever we put in the tie-breaking procedures, so that we're able to, when there is a tie in seniority, we're able to make those choices. So all of that, of course, needs to be in place and be ready for this summer layoff procedure. But none of it can happen until the Budget Act, the final Budget Act, is passed, which has a deadline of June 15th. And so once that occurs, Then no earlier than 5 days after that, there would be a scheduled a board meeting to consider reduction in force. There's certain procedures that are outlined with the CBO writing a letter and superintendent writing a recommendation to the board, and then finally the resolution for reduction in force. And then, as you can see in the handout, there's notices, dates of notice, June 29th for certificated and administrators, and then final notices would be, and the actual affected layoffs would be August 15th. So that's sort of a nutshell, hopefully brief enough, but to give you an idea of how that process works. And I feel like we're in good hands, having had gone through it pretty seamlessly in March, and having school and college at our side to make sure that we're prepared to do the right thing here. Any questions or
Thank you,
clarifications?
Chris. Any questions for Chris?
Chris, I did on the, when it says determine whether to adopt skipping or tie-breaking criteria if necessary, it says immediately, but then did I misunderstand, or do we actually wait till after June 15th to then do that?
It's a good question. The immediately is the quote immediately in the document you're looking at is the recommendation of school and college. Because this could happen so quickly, they want us to really have these things prepared and ready. And so much like we did in March 15th, we worked on it well before that time to to be sure that we had the right so that we were positioned well, so that the layoffs would happen in the way that we wanted them to happen strategically. Yeah.
So we wouldn't necessarily wait till after the 15th. So for example, that particular line,
yeah, go ahead.
That particular line of whether to adopt skipping or tie-breaking criteria, that's something we could actually do. When I say now, I don't mean tonight, but that's something we could schedule between now and the 15th. So we're already prepared, because here's the thing I'm concerned with. I don't want all of a sudden have one night that goes till 3:30 in the morning because we have so many things to do. If we can do a lot of that groundwork now. So that's why I was trying to understand the difference between immediately, or is it pending immediately? I mean, I don't want to get into these different So me personally, I'm only 1 out of 5 votes. I would rather try and meet more often and get as many things done in smaller bites and in smaller meetings than in a couple big ones with a clock ticking on us. So that's just I just wanted to clarify what you had said, because I appreciate.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Rich. Just know that because we've gone through this cycle, the district has in the past, we've got a fair amount of history, and those documents are pretty well written up, but of course they're tweaked every time based on the circumstances. So we're pretty much ready to roll to give you something to consider in that regard.
Cool. Thank you.
There are any other questions? All right.
I was thrown out and I'm back.
Okay. I was waiting for any more questions, Brandon, just to catch you up.
Okay.
So if I haven't heard any, but waiting.
I had a quick question, Chris.
Sure.
So if the board were to reduce an administrator at one of the sites, would that be a PKS as well? And then that person would possibly bump back to a teaching position?
Yes.
Yes.
That's correct. They would have a right to retreat, is what it's called.
Okay, thank you.
Technically, yeah.
I just wanted to say thank you, Chris, for putting this together. It's really helpful and very easy to follow. So appreciate it.
Good. Thank you.
All right, moving to considerations to potential budget adjustments. I have listed here phases that will make sense when we go through the numbers. Lois, did you want to talk us through the phases?
I can certainly do that.
Okay.
So because of the unknown feature of all of this with the state budget, we do have to consider phases. There are things, as I explained at the last workshop, that we can consider right now for reductions. They don't follow some of the same timelines, so we could make the choices, and if they were so chosen, they would go into the budget that I'm preparing for the June 16th public hearing. We will go through, there'll be examples. This is now the format that we have the possible adjustments listed, so it will become more clear, as Brandon said, when we go through those lists. Phase 2 starts to happen because of what we already talked about. As we look to what school will look like in the fall, more opportunities either for increased expenditures or possibly additional reductions, things we won't need, positions we won't need in the fall, depending on what we're doing. That's not something we can start to consider right now. We can know that it will be a discussion in the future, but we don't have enough information to start to talk about how that's going to affect the budget. We most likely will be able to have that information in time for the 45-day revision. And let me explain what that is. Every year, it happens that school districts have to get their budgets in and completed before the state budget is adopted. So the Ed Code allows us to do a 45-day revision to the budget. And that is when we take into account anything that happened in the governor's budget that we didn't know about when we created the first budget. So these sorts of things will be added at 45-day revision. And it might not just be limited to the things having to do with school. We may, through our discussions over the next few weeks, come up with things that we didn't make it into the June 16th version of the budget, but we can put it into the 45-day revision. This particular year will be, I think, well known for its fluidity. We will be adjusting many times as we go through the year. Phase 3.
Just a second. Could you be clear about when that 45 days starts and, more importantly, ends?
It starts from the day the governor approves his budget. So they have a deadline of June 15th, but in the last couple of years, it's actually been a little bit earlier. So it has to be presented to you prior to 45 days from the date of the state budget adoption is the deadline that we have to adopt those budget revisions.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Okay. And then there will be continuing information from Sacramento beyond the budget adoption. They have postponed income tax collection until July. So they will start to tally all that up. Come August, September, we'll start hearing numbers about what the true revenue of the state is. They're estimating right now. That's all they can do. But come August and September, we'll have better numbers. As those numbers come in from all the different sources of income tax, as well as sales tax, different things, those will prompt either the kinds of changes where we don't have to do as many reductions. Maybe the news is better. Maybe we get some sort of bailout from federal. Maybe the legislature at that point decides to help us in some other way. We can reflect all of that on first interim. So there's several opportunities as we go to adjust our budget. And the thing that's interesting this year is our county office is well aware of this. It's not the same as a situation where we're deficit spending and we end up with a negative budget and the county office comes and looks at us and says, what is it you're doing? How are you going to fix this? Every single district in Sonoma County is in this position. So there will be some flexibility on their part. I have been to several webinars where they're saying from a state level and a county level, they don't expect all districts by any means to have positive budgets this first time around. It's likely that third year out is going to be negative until we get a handle on all the different ways that we can possibly fix that. They can't expect us to fix it immediately. It's the rare district that has reserves high enough to cover this without doing some major thought with reductions. And as we've said many times, those reductions need to be done thoughtfully and carefully so that we still can serve the kids in the way we need to. We lost the slide, Brandon. Did I cover everything there?
Oh, I think you did, because I have now the list of things to put up.
Oh, it happens automatically when I've covered all the topics?
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. That's good. So I'm just trying, oh, you know what? Before I start this, I want to answer George's question. And that is, it's been suggested that we don't do any cuts. That is one possibility. Of course, lack of action is one possibility. It always is. But as anyone who's been in Windsor for, what was it, 8 years ago that FCMAT appeared, it was, I believe, 2 years before I started working here. If you run out of cash and or you cannot meet your expenditures in your out years or even the current year, which that's where we'd be. Let's go back. If we don't fix the $4.5 million hole that will be in if all happens as they are saying right now, and that is a question, we don't know yet if this is truly going to be the way it is, but for now, that's what they're telling us to plan for. For Windsor, it's a $4.5 million hole. If we don't fix that $4.5 million hole, it will eat up our reserves by the end of next year. And when we don't have reserves, when we can't meet our reserve requirement of the state, which is 3% of our total expenditures, approximately $1.8 million for Windsor, they take over. The board loses all power. The superintendent and CBO are, I don't know about escorted out, but they pretty much can't make decisions. A state agent comes in, FCMAT comes in, and they make all financial decisions for the district. Their job is to get the district back on its feet. And basically, if we're out of cash, we get a loan from the state, which we then have to pay back over some set amount of years. It's an added expense to the budget. It is not a fun situation. The local board and the community lose all control over what happens with their school district. And that's the main reason why we want to stay away from such a situation. As painful as it is, we need to do what we can to keep our financial statements and our cash flowing so that we can have control over our own school district. I don't think anybody would like what would happen if someone came in. They don't care about our district the same way that this community and board and staff does.
So Lois, I appreciate that explanation. So that way everybody can grasp a little bit. I think all the trustees understand that. And that's kind of why I'm leaning more towards what is the state going to do? If we don't do anything, the state will come in and do it for us. And they're going to do it worse and they're going to do deeper because, as you just mentioned, they don't have the same goals that we might have.
Their goal is to get us flush.
Right. So I hope everybody understands that that's the bracket that the board, that we all have to deal with. Is that on the one hand, everybody wants no cuts, no reductions, continue to live like we did 6 months ago or a year ago. And on the other hand, obscurity is kind of the other end of that bracket. So that's a choice, and hopefully we can come somewhere in between that. So we got to quit deficit spending because that will lead us there slowly. But anyhow, thank you.
Okay. Should we go to the list?
Well, Lois and Brandon and Mr. President, before we get to the budget adjustment ideas, this afternoon we got the PowerPoint Part 2, and I would suggest for a context of the range of adjustments and making them or not making them, it would be helpful to cover those
the
several
scenarios?
scenarios. And let's
Sure.
come back, if we might, to the list at the end, because I saw that there was an additional scenario added. And also your discussion of the timeline, I think, which is the skip slide, I find helpful as a visual to kind of talk through that. So if that would be all right with the trustees, and then we can come back to talk about alternatives and options and effects of different adjustments.
So Brandon, why don't we just do a 10-second on the multi-year?
Okay.
Thank you. I just have to move the pictures so I can see the whole thing. My computer is not cooperating. Okay. So without going into great detail on the multi-year, I want to look at the bottom line. That's all we're going to look at right now. And this is our ending fund balance. And the first column is this year. So this year we are estimated to have an ending fund balance of $8,395,000. We're required to have a 3% reserve, which, as I mentioned before, is about 1.8 million. The board has chosen to ask for a 5% reserve, which takes us up to about 2.2 or 2.3. So as you can see, even with 2.3, that leaves us with $6 million of beyond what our normal reserve requirement is. Because of the hole in our budget, the $4.5 million, which appears for 2021, that ending balance will be eaten up because our expenditures will far outweigh our revenue. That will end up with a fund balance of $3.5 million. That $3,531,677 in the second column. That still covers our 5% reserve. So for next year, we've met our reserve. But without making any reductions, in the second year, we go to a negative $2,446,000. You see that in the third column. That's the point where we're going to be running out of cash and we have no money for our reserves. That's when the county calls the state in because we have not been able to take care of our financial business. And in the third year out with no explanations or changes, it's going to go to $9.5 million. And the reason we do 3 years like this is it has become required at every financial reporting period. School districts need to do a multi-year. It's the state's way of ensuring that we take care of business. Prior to this being required, which was, I think, over 20 years ago, it was put into place. There was a several school districts went bankrupt. They were looking 1 year at a time. They weren't thinking about the future. And they were then faced with no cash and no ability to meet their expenditures. So this has been one way where the county can practice oversight and help school districts stay financially solvent. So the next slides, what I did for the board was to show the power of varying patterns of making reductions and how it can impact that balance. So on all of these, when you look at the top row, it's gray where it says from MYP, that is the ending fund balance from each of those 3 years that I described above, where it's the 3.5 the first year, negative 2.4 the second, and negative 9 the third. And then I show in each of the 3 years what some possible reduction scenarios are. This particular one has a $2 million reduction the first year. And because we've done it the first year, those reductions follow through for the next 2 years. So it's 2, 2, and 2. Same, no new reductions in that first line. It's the same reductions having an impact on our budget for each of 3 years. And then in the second year, we make another 2 million. That has an impact the second year and the third year. And then the third year, we do a third line of reductions at $2 million each. I will say that that's a fairly, I'm going to go over the numbers next, but in general, that's a fairly painful way to do it because it continues the cuts. It's not as large the first year, but there is a whole experience of reductions each year. But what happens is the first year, our fund balance goes from 3.5 up to 5.5 because we had $2 million less in expenditures. The second year, we had started with the 2.4, but we get the impact of both the years. Actually, let's go back. That what happens is that negative 2.4, this 2,000 from the first year changes that ending balance. And it really, we only are starting now with negative 446. We've gained $2 million from the previous year. And then we get the impact of that same $2 million because we're not doing those expenditures this year also. And then an additional 2 million. So we've gone from, without any cuts, we had a negative 2.4, we're up to 3.5. We've met our reserve requirement with no problem. And without going into all the details, it follows through and we get a balance of 2.3. So in this scenario, $2 million of reductions each year would have us meet our reserve requirement all 3 years. That's pretty hefty reductions. There's no suggestion one way or another. I'm just trying to show how each of them impact what our financials look like down the road. Okay.
I could chime in a second. That $2 million each year would translate to about 3.5% each year. So we'd cut 3.5% this year, 3.5% more on top of that the second year, and a third year. So when you add them all together, it's over a 10% cut still. It's just doing a little bit each of those 3 years.
Thank you, Eric. Okay.
I have a question, Lois.
Yes.
Just out of curiosity and not advocating that this is necessarily a good idea, but I'm wondering if it is possible, just because I want to look at every single possibility, is when we look at those 3 scenarios, and we're making cuts evenly, right? We're doing 2 million, 2 million, 2 million. Is it possible to do 0, 3, 3?
Of course. And there's, I'll go through the other scenarios and you'll get a better idea of what it is. It's, the general rule is it's better to do more up front because then you get the impact for all 3 years, but you can do any kind of scenario.
Thanks.
So this one is a little bit softer up front. It's $1 million the first year and then 2 the following 2 years. And you can see it gives us, if you just go to the bottom lines, our reserves are still strong the first year, but the second year we just squeak by, maybe not even, depending on what our total expenditures are. We're very close to meeting our 3% the second year, but we're nowhere close the third year out. And that's the difference of $1 million over 3 years. So that this actually sort of speaks, Stephanie, it's not 0, but it's a lesser amount. So it speaks to the impact of that when you do that the first year and hold the bigger ones for later. Any questions on that one? Okay. This is a big one. This is a 3-2-2, and this is an example of very healthy reserves all the way through. Very aggressive. Just wanted, again, to show what variances could be. There's no suggestion or desire to do this. Just wanted to show the impact of those numbers. Okay.
Hey, Lois.
Mm-hmm.
Is it true that the reason why we have the ability to have a couple of these scenarios because the board in previous years had made sure they had a pretty healthy reserve that has been carried forward?
I'm not sure what you're asking, Rich.
In other words, if we had only maintained a 3%,
Oh, yeah,
reserve,
exactly.
which is, so if we had only historically maintained a 3% reserve, and the board historically had not, I believe they voted to actually increase that reserve even more than what was required. If they had done that previously, we would have zero options right now in that regard.
Correct. That is correct, because we'd have to maintain that 3% and we could do nothing but reduce. Now we have the cushion of that higher reserve to help us do this a little more gradually.
Right. So with that in mind, first, all previous board members, thank you for giving us that option. And second, I don't want to hamstring future boards by us not doing the same good fiscal management of making sure that we have a little bit of a reserve. We know we're having a declining enrollment. We know our funds are declining. I think, if my own personal opinion, I just think it's irresponsible as trustees if we slough this off to somebody else down the road to clean up. This is our time that we're supposed to make good decisions. And we know we have a $4 million roughly decline this year in our income. And I think we should probably be looking more towards that. And I mean, 4 million is what our estimate is when the budget comes out. If it's only 2 million, that's awesome. If it's nothing, even better. So, I'm not a cutter. I'm a business guy. I'm used to finding more money than to meet our expenses. But anyhow, I just wanted to point that out, that the reason why we have some luxury now is because of the fiscal management that has been done previous. And I just want to remind folks that somebody else is going to inherit this down the road, and I hope they can say the same thing about us.
Sharon, you have a comment, please?
Yeah, it's just a clarification, and I might just be misunderstanding. If what I'm hearing is that there's a $4.5 million cut that we need to make, but all the scenarios that you're showing have more than that. So is that because it's per year that needs to happen, or what?
It's a $4.5 million hole, Sharon, but it's there all 3 years. So over 3 years, it's can I do the math? $13.5 million, which is why we go from a healthy reserve that first year in the multi-year to a -9+ in the third year.
Okay, so it's 4.5 per year.
Single year, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And to back up a bit in regard to Rich's comments, the California School Board Association, they give us lots of guidance and leadership along the way. They recommend having a 17% reserve, which seems outrageous when the unions would scream at us, we need to get bigger raises, we need to have more programs. But if you look at the depth of that, 17% reserves basically pays 2 months of expenses. It's 1/6 of our total budget. We chose to go from the required 3% up to 5% several years ago to make sure that we don't have a situation that we're in now being even worse than what it is now, like Rich mentioned. So, reserves is kind of a tricky situation. You'd love to have a huge savings account. That's basically our reserves. But at the same time, you want to be able to fund your staff and you want to be able to fund your programs. And so we don't go up to 17% and just have a big carryover. We try to spend as much as we can each year, but still reserve that 1/20th of our budget that's helping us a little bit now.
Share.
Oh.
Are other people seeing it?
Do you see it, everyone? No? Okay. Huh.
Can I make a quick comment about reserves?
Yes.
What are they actually for, if not for spending in times of dire need?
Well, are you asking the board or are you asking me?
Well, you and the board. I mean, I know they are for things like catastrophic events. We are in a catastrophic event. Spending some of it down, I'm not advocating for all of it. You know, we don't have crazy reserves, but 17% is crazy. That's almost right? That's almost 1/5 of your money you're putting in a bank account instead of spending it on students and custodians and librarians and technology, right? Those are the things we need right now. And so we built it up so we could use it in times of emergency to some degree. But now's not the time to be adding into the reserves because our economic situation should improve over time. This is different than the 2008 recession.
I didn't mean to imply that we wanted to add to reserves. That was a recommendation from the past from the School Board Association. We have always been at 3 or 5%, and we are going to be using those reserves now, like you mentioned.
Okay.
Every model that you're looking at that Lois is sharing are trying to work those reserves down, or using some of that extra percentage points that we had from the 5 down to the 3 level. We may need to pass a resolution to change our reserve requirement from 5 back to 3, but that's not something we're doing tonight, obviously.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I just wanted to echo in. I agree with Pete's comments and Eric's. I think the 5% reserve that we created as a board was to prevent situations in the future in terms of financial crisis. But this is a crisis, so I would recommend that we would probably go down to a 3% reserve. And then hopefully once this is over in a couple of years, maybe the board can go back to a 5%. But I don't know how we're going to tell staff there's a 5% reserve. We're laying off all these people, but we could have used that 2%. And I understand Rich's comments that we want to solve things and not kick the can down the road. But this is the time when you'd want to go from 5% to 3%, because otherwise there's going to be a lot of people out there saying, well, there's 2% extra. They could have kept these other jobs and now they're unemployed. So,
well, but the thing to remember about reserves is it's one-time money.
Yeah.
So it helps you get through until things get better.
Right.
You can't save a job and not do anything else. You have to increase your revenue. And I don't know that there needs to be any action by the board to change the reserve level. You can say what you prefer is a 5%. The financial situation will thrust it upon you that you don't have a 5%. If we need to, depending on, and you can choose by these scenarios or by the planning of any reductions, how you want to access the reserves.
I'm glad Pete brought that up, so that way everybody's on the same page. Yeah, the idea has never been, in my mind, to have 17%. No, the thought was that in good times, try to get it up to 5. I can't remember the name of the person, but somebody wrote a letter to the board and they said, hey, look, if this is not a situation where you use your reserves, then what is? And I agree that is something where, so we have a little cushion. We can't go below 3, because if we do, then Lois just explained, the other folks come in. So we were already in a deficit spending glide path anyway. So was more of an acknowledgement that sometimes it is good to have reserves. So when silly things like this do come up, the only challenge that I have not the only challenge, but one of my concerns is that in all the news that we get on the budget and things coming up is that there is a concern, and I'm not an economist, so I don't know, but they're thinking that next year we could actually have another bad budget because of the lingering effects economically of this. So if we don't have some reserves, if we don't have a decent reserve, next year it could be even worse than what we already think it might be now. So I'm very conservative, and I don't spend money that I don't have. In my private life, I don't spend it. I don't think I'm supposed to do that here either, or that we are, but that's what we're all going to look at. So, Pete, I appreciate the fact that Pete brought that up. But yeah, this is a time where you do have the reserves and you use them because we're in troubling times. But I think we use them smartly, and that's what we're going to try and do.
And just to clarify, the amount of reserves we're talking about 3% is a state requirement. We cannot go below that, as was mentioned. We're
Right.
currently at 5%. And in our current situation, the budget we have this year, that's about $800,000 extra. So if we're looking at a $4.5 million reduction, we can only put 800,000 toward that if we change our number down to 3%. It's not going to solve all of our problems to spend our reserves. It only puts a dent in it. It's a small piece of that $4.5 million that will be encumbered over the next year or so.
Eric, I'm going to go ahead and make a comment. So I really came into this process feeling like that maybe the best thing would be to make the cuts early and then build back in if we feel like scenarios are changing or improving. And the crazy thing about this situation is that we don't know what the end result is, right? We're operating in a state of not knowing the end of the story. So that's always challenging because you're trying to do the right thing and you're trying to weigh lots of different things without knowing what the ultimate outcome is going to be. And the ultimate outcome can even change by things that happen during this time period, whether there is advocacy that happens, whether people do kind of coalesce around this issue and decide ideally what I would like to see happen is people really kind of understand that investing in public education is investing in the economic engine of our country. I really believe that this is where working people send their kids to public schools. Education is not childcare, but a lot of kids go to school while their parents work. And also education is just so important. You know, this is what we give to our citizens when they're young to help develop them as people. So that's something that I have in mind. I'm also thinking about all of I'm appreciative of all the community interest in this because I've seen a lot of really interesting ideas. I appreciate people saying, what if we do nothing? What if we do everything? I think it's really good that we're talking about every single idea and fleshing all of them out. And I'm glad that we're spending the time to really talk through everything. One idea that I hadn't thought about before that came up in a conversation yesterday, because I had been kind of thinking of this conservative approach, was what if, our district, something that we're known for is having really strong relationships with our unions and with our employees, and that there is a lot of trust there. There's a very collaborative relationship, and I think that's something that we should be really proud of. And I think one concern is that if we act too quickly and we basically lay a bunch of people off, which is what we will end up doing, that we will damage that relationship, perhaps irreparably. So I think that's a legitimate concern is what I'm really interested in kind of union positions on this in terms of what is the preference? Is it to take this slow and wait to see how it plays out, with the understanding that if it doesn't go well, we would have to make drastic cuts later on and everyone would have to get on board with that? Or do we want to do it now? Like, I want to hear what people think, because ultimately I represent people. I represent you. We all represent you. And I didn't really run for school board to be an administrator for a budget that I think is just negligent in overlooking the importance of education. So I want to know what people want to do, but I will also act responsibly. But I want to know what is the position of our leaders.
I can tell you my position is that we should try and go more slowly at the beginning, and if in year 2 or 3 we have to make bigger cuts, that's better than making them and having a finely balanced budget and more in reserves in year 3, right? Because we don't have enough information to really know how this is going to turn out. And so by doing what we can to get by, to meet the legal requirements that we need to, and I think we have to be creative. We have to look at sources of revenue and, what we can do with the Windsor Creek property, what we can do with the tribe money. things that we are uncomfortable dealing with, but it would be better to try and save jobs and keep things going, because, you know, we haven't even really talked about the enormous challenges facing teachers next year. Whatever the scenario for teaching, it's going to require teaching in a way we haven't ever taught before. And it's going to require more money for PPE and masks and things like that. And you're going to have some teachers who won't be able to come to the classroom because of health concerns. So all that stuff is very different. And I think it's an opportunity to work together in a way that we haven't really before. You know, and my hope is that we can find solutions and find a way of working together that will enhance our relationship. That one of the positive outcomes is that we don't think about winning and losing. We think about being a team together. The district office, the board, the administrators, the teachers, the classified, everybody who works for Windsor is on the same team, and we have the same goals. And we forget that from time to time, right? We get positional and we start distrusting each other. And if we could work toward that out of this whole pandemic, then we'll come out stronger. Because that's my goal, is that we don't only survive, we come out a better school district at the end of all of this. And it's going to be hard to do. There's no doubt. But that's what I want to see happen.
Pete, if I could just follow up. So the thing that I was concerned about, or one of the things I was concerned about, is that if we made smaller cuts initially, I mean, I don't know that I would, if I was a teacher or if I was an employed person in the district and I knew that, hey, I'm probably the next person on that list to get cut if things get worse on the economy down the road. I've asked myself this question: would I rather get laid off now and go try and find a different job somewhere or at a different place that's more secure with whatever they're doing, or do I want to still stay there working and maybe, you know, I'm going to have a little bit of a reduction in my income because of furloughs possibly, but knowing that, man, if things don't get better, I'm going to be gone next year, most likely with a second round of cuts. So that's kind of my question, is that that's why this is so perplexing, because I don't really know the right answer to that. So could you help us a little bit more in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like you're going to jump over to Santa Rosa or some other place to find a teaching job, right? I mean, everybody's in the same position. So switching districts isn't going to be so much of an option, or even going out of state isn't going to be so much of an option. So I would rather have a job for a year or two and maybe be worried about that third year, because that third year is 3 years from now, right? Right now, I am concerned, like, what happens in August? If I have a job going through the year, I can at least make plans. My family can decide, you know, how they're going to deal with it. It's not giving into fear. It's not giving into the fear of what will happen 2 or 3 years from now. It's focusing on the present. And that's what I think we need to do.
Thanks for your insight.
Karen? Quick question. Is Brad here? Oh, actually, we just got a message from him. Okay.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
Yes?
Yes.
And I would love to make one after Sharon.
Okay, so I agree with what Pete was saying, and I appreciate him being vocal about it. And I must say that I have felt, as an admin who's been pretty vocal, I've felt very supported by the board and very supported by teachers through this whole process, and by the district office. So I'm very proud of who we are as a district. What I'm hearing right now that is somewhat bothering me is we're focusing, but understandable, is that we're focusing on jobs, and we need to focus on the students. I think the bigger picture here is, if we lay off all of these people or we cut all of these services, we're cutting the education for the 5,000 students in this district. If I lost my job, I would be devastated. but I need to focus on the students and the education that we're providing. And with the cuts that the state is asking us to make, and granted, I know that's not the fault of our district at all. And I'm proud of the open conversation and transparency we're having. I do not see how we can provide a quality education for these students at the level that we are expected to. And who's going to suffer is our youth. And then us afterwards, because they're going to be the ones leading the country. So I think we have to remind ourselves to go back to the students rather than just the jobs.
And
Julie, you want to comment?
Yeah, thank you. I'll echo everything that Pete and Sharon are saying. And I appreciate the board just listening to all of us and asking for our opinions on this, because we have been reaching out to our certificated and our classified and hearing all of this. And what I'm taking from all of this, I would appreciate going slower too. I know that that's sometimes hard. We don't want to leave a mess for anyone behind, but I have a lot of hope. I have hope that we can rebound from this. We have been through the most horrendous year ever. And I've seen our staff at Maddie Washburn come back from the fires and the evacuation and rise above and bring our group together. And like we really kind of need to hold on to that hope. And when we start making those cuts, as she says, we got to put the kids first. And when we're cutting the things that are going to be hurting our kids, that takes away the hope from our staff. It takes away the hope from our community. And if that's possible, that we could start off slower in hopes that something's going to come maybe down the pipeline. I do have to say the silver lining of this whole COVID is that people really did start to see education as a different thing. It has been my soapbox that if you invest in bottom up, we'll have less and less problems in the world. But not everybody sees that, and I understand. But this has been a silver lining, definitely, that people are truly seeing the value of what education does, not just from a standpoint of being daycare, but what educators do day in, day out, everything from our custodian to our bus drivers to our teachers to our office staff. And so I would just love to take that year one, do the least amount of cuts, everybody knowing, yes, okay, there might be bigger cuts, but we're all in this together. And as Pete said, nobody's going to be leaving, thinking, oh, next year I might get cut. They're going to be at the bottom of a totem pole if they go to Santa Rosa or Petaluma or wherever. I would just really beg and plead that we go slow and we take it year by year. I think we have been financially appropriate and wonderful. And this is the time that we get to then prosper in that. You guys have made great reserves. This is the time where we are needing that. And I just hope that that's how we can move forward. Thank you for listening.
I appreciate the comments from some of our administrators and our union representatives. I'd like to try to get back to let Lois complete her portion of this, and then we can maybe have some more time for comments later. Not trying to cut anybody off. I just want to make sure we get all the information in the next hour before we need to close. So please, Lois, continue.
Okay, I have one more scenario, and that is this one assumes no cuts. And in the first year, we used the tribal money to help get us through and keep our reserves up of $1 million. That's one time. It doesn't flow through to other years, as you can see. And then we prepare during next year to sell Windsor Creek and use those funds in the second year. Gives a big boost to the second year, but that does not follow through. And as you see, third year out, we are still negative 5 million. So I just wanted to illustrate that infusing one-time money can help, but it doesn't solve the problem. We really need to do any of that with care and combined with other efforts. Any questions there?
Just a quick one, Lois. Normally you can't use, I don't believe we can use the sale of property.
That is correct.
So with the little Byron, I believe we've got I can't remember what the word is, but anyhow, we've got permission to be able to do that in this situation.
Yes, yes, we do. It's an offer of flexibility from the governor.
Do we know how long that offer of flexibility lasts? Is it a 6-month offer, a year? So in other words, would they maybe change that rule back?
Well, and that's a really good point. It might be that it's only on the table this year.
Yeah.
But I would think that what that would mean is if it's only on the table this year, then that would be because next year the budget's going to look a whole lot better. I would think if we continued in this bad financial status, they would keep that going until we came out of it.
And just a point to mention, yes, we do have the facilities bond that we passed in 2016, but those monies are not allowed to be spent on the general fund. They have to be spent on facilities projects and land purchase and repair of roofs and things like that that we've got in process right now. So we can't just transfer some of that money across to save programs. We have to spend it on what it was voted on by the community in 2016.
Just one more point, Lois. That number, we could have a debate at another time on this, but that number, I believe, is for the Windsor Creek site, that's a sell it now barn sale type price.
Which is why I use that, because that's basically what this would be doing.
Right, but what I mean is that I think everyone needs to understand that property could very well easily be worth $8, $9, $10, $11, $12 million, depending on how it is zoned down the road. So we would really be eating a lot of our seed corn potentially by this scenario with that Windsor Creek property.
Understood. Okay, are we done? That's the last scenario that I have.
Shall we move to the list?
So this is a revision of the list that we looked at last week. We've adjusted it to reflect the phased in approach that I talked about earlier. The first point I want to make, you can see lines 5 and 6. This first group are items that would have been brought forward without the state budget crisis to deal with declining enrollment. Ooh, you're making me dizzy, Brandon.
Sorry.
It's all right. To deal with declining enrollment and deficit spending. We have been planning to have a budget workshop to deal with those two issues, declining enrollment and deficit spending, for quite a while. Different things have happened that put it off. But those are two issues that our district has been facing for several years now. And they haven't gone away just because the state financial crisis is here. So the hole that we're seeing is not only from the state 10% cut, it is from these two facts. So this first group of items are things that if COVID-19 did not exist and we were in our regular way of doing business, we would have been bringing forward some ideas for reductions to help as some of our board members like to say, to help right size the district and get us back to living within our means rather than spending more than what we take in. And so if there's any questions on that, if not, I'll move forward to what these items actually are. Okay. The first one is we have both regular state funding and we have what's called supplemental state funding. And the supplemental funding is meant to serve our neediest students, those with on the free and reduced plan for meals, those who are English language learners and foster children. And it's a sum of money, approximately $2 million a year, that we are tasked with spending to help improve programs and services for those students. The state has recently become a little bit more flexible in how they look at what you can do with that supplemental funding. So we have been working to come up with some ideas of costs, staff costs, that we have always or traditionally paid through the general fund, that now we believe we can move those salaries into the supplemental funding. And that will relieve our general fund to an amount of about $450,000. So that's a big help right there. And then we have some smaller items that have been in the general fund budget, where we paid AXA memberships for our administrators' staff. We believe we can remove that. We have provided garden support for one of our elementary schools. That is on the table to remove. And luckily this year, as I mentioned last week, Sue McQuitty was able to get a grant from Raley's. So Brooks will not be without their garden program. They will be able to use the grant for that. We are looking at some outside contractors that we have used in the district, of suspending those services for about $32,000. Looking at account clerks at Brooks and Maddie, and changing the FTE for those two jobs to a 0.5 rather than a 1. We added, line 15, we added some temporary clerk positions to those same two elementary schools to help them get through the reconfiguration. We would like to remove those jobs. We are going to, would like to reduce discretionary site budgets of about 10%, which gives us $25,000. Removal of volunteer coordinators is another one we are suggesting. And I have two columns here, one for this year, this coming budget year, 2021, and the other for 21-22. And the first column on some of these salaries is different than the second column, because we're required to give 60-day notice to classified unit members, and the 60 days can only be counted during their work year. So because of where we are in the school year, if this goes through, they would be given their 60-day notice at the time of school starting up, or their work year starting up. So the salary that would not hit the general fund for 2021 is less than what would not hit the general fund in 21-22. The district office, since for several years since SCO changed how they supported CTE, the district office has been allocating $20,000 to the high school for CTE support. We are now asking the high school to cover that with their funds. And then we're talking about removing one groundskeeper from our staff to help hit the numbers that we're looking for. So these numbers, as you can see, in each year total right around $700,000.
Lois, I have a question.
Uh-huh.
So, and I want to make sure I understand this. It appears that the 21-22 column is $37,620 more than the 21-20 column.
Okay.
So there's a little bit more savings. And what's strange to me is it's not 731,000 in more savings. It's that 693 of these cuts is if we look at year one, it would have been 693, 693, 693. And
so you're saying
there's only 37,000 more in the second year.
So probably there's something wrong with my formulas then?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. I mean, when I see this, I would say, great, we true up that. I understand those three salaries. There's a difference of 37,000 more because the savings is already realized in 2021, right? So we're not getting another 700,000. We're compounding what's not carried forward.
No. I see what you're asking. The first year, these numbers total, like across the board, when I did those scenarios, you saw a million, a million, a million.
Okay.
In this one, because some of these people could potentially be working for 60 days, the
Right.
first year it's a little bit less, but then it becomes the total the second year.
I get that. I just wanted people to not think that this second year is the second year's additional cuts.
Got it.
On almost any of these. If you go to the second page, as I looked at the whole column until you get down to the potential furlough days for the union members, the second year only is $425,000 more. It's not another $2.8 million.
Got it.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understood that, because it's a little more the second year, but it's not year two with another large cut. It's a slight augmentation to the first year savings.
It's an impact to year two from the same cuts that happened the first
yes,
year.
all right. Thank you. That's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure I was clear and not
Yes,
didn't misunderstand.
I'm sorry I took a bit to understand that.
All right.
No, so Lois, if there was a third year, the third year should say 731, correct?
Correct. That is correct.
Because we're not having those 60 days.
Correct. Okay, are we ready to move on? Additionally, we've had discussions to have some one-time fund, or we do have some one-time funding that we can use to help our situation for year one. We have, in that same supplemental money we talked about moving some salaries into, we have some carryover that we're able to, because of some change situations, we're able to move the carryover from this year's supplemental that has gone unspent one time into the general fund. And that is at this point estimated to be $451,953. And I think I have the wording wrong on this. I'm not sure, but we're getting some federal relief funding, let's just call it that, of right around $276,000. That's one time that's been given to us to help offset the effects of COVID. So that will go into our budget. And then we are making the suggestion that the tribal donation be divided between this year and next to help offset some of the impact of the cuts.
So just for clarification for the public that's viewing and people that are watching, unspent supplemental carryover, that doesn't mean that we would have necessarily had that, but in this situation, we didn't have a lot of substitutes in the spring. We didn't have field trips. We didn't have supplies that were being purchased, things like that. That's why we have so much
it's
carryover.
Also, it's an accumulation of carryover from several years of supplemental. So it's unspent supplemental for the last, how long have we had it? 5 years, 6 years? That each year there is an amount that goes unspent. And we've never hit our whole total. We've been trying, but every year things happen that money doesn't get spent. So this is the accumulation over the last, since we started receiving supplemental money. It's really not all from 1 year.
Okay.
So then we, this is a cumulative total down below of the $1,227,000 for the first year and $500,000 for the second year. This third item, I didn't quite know where to put it, but the governor has given us some flexibility with what's called our routine and restricted maintenance funding. We're required generally to take 3%, they love that 3% number, and contribute that amount towards our routine and restricted maintenance budget. That is the budget that our maintenance department uses to pay their salaries, buy their supplies, hire the outside people that do special work, all of those things. There's a little tweak that they've changed, and we can actually decrease that by $45,000 this coming year. So that's a little bit of help. So all of these things, as I said, the first group is what we would have suggested in the beginning to help offset our declining enrollment and deficit spending. The next few things are just kind of things that appear that we've found that could help the situation. And then we start to move into the next group. And these are some of the things we had last week. These are ideas to move, to change, to make reductions, to help get to a number that would make a difference in our budget. I want to make the point, and it will be remade down the road. These are clearly generally classified positions. It's not because that's all we're looking at. It's because all we can agree on, all that we can put in the budget for June 16th are things that the board can actually say yes to. We can't put in maybes. So at this point, because the certificated layoff window is not open, we don't have the ability to say, yes, we know our enrollment's going to be down. We're going to lay off 2 extra teachers at such and such place. So that is one of those conversations that is in the pipeline, but it just can't happen yet. So I wanted to make it clear that it's not just a direct choice to only pick classified positions, which I know doesn't make it any better, but I did want to make that clarification. So
Lois, just on that clarification. So you're saying that even though that we think that we may have to plan that way down the road, is it improper to have that discussion now, or it's not? You're not supposed to have it now, or the
we don't know. We don't know that window is going to open. So it.
I mean, all indicators are, but until it actually does, then you just don't do it.
Because it has been that way in the past, and the legislature has shut it down. So it seems that it does not make sense to talk about it until we know that it's a possibility.
Thank you.
Yeah, in my recollection, in the last 25 years, it's only been opened once.
Oh.
So these are pretty much the same. I want to emphasize number 37, 5 furlough days for all admin. We added the phrase including district office. There seemed to be some misunderstanding. Oh, and I apologize. There's another change too. I guess I didn't get the edits in that I thought I did. But first, my first point is this is all administrators, district office, classified, certificated, managers, everyone who's not in one of the bargaining units. So I want to make that clear, always has been. And then we had a discussion where we've decided that this number 124,600 actually represents 7 days. And the reason that we've moved it from 5 to 7 is to match with the certificated union. We have cut 2 PD, professional development days, from their calendar. This was done long, I won't say long, but prior to the COVID issues as part of our deficit spending and financial solvency issues. So we want to let them know that we are matching that 7 days with admin, that is something that we're willing to do. So that number's gone up a bit. And otherwise, I think we added 1 district office position, I think since last week, to this list. That there's 2 different positions at the district office we're looking at. And otherwise, I think they're all the same. The other clarification is the student advisor listed here is a high school position. And we also have found out, just because, you know, everything's up for discussion, we got the information today because there's been a lot of discussion about sports, as we all know. To cut stipends for non-varsity would save about $60,000. The varsity cost for stipends is an estimated $70,000. So that's a little bit of extra information there. So, and these totals are not cumulative. That's the total of this section for each of the years. Any questions there? So this ends the section of items that we have come up with that would impact, that we could use to impact the June 16th budget. And then these are cumulative totals of 3.1 the first year, 2.8 the second year. And then we move into some of the other sections. We have furlough days, which both unions we've had discussions with, and they're willing to entertain the idea of 5 furlough days. These are the number, but we can't do that until the state tells us that we can reduce our instructional year by 5 days. So we're waiting. That will be hopefully part of the June 15th budget adoption from the governor. And these are the numbers of 5 days for each of the units. So that would add back $710,000 to each of the years. And I'll remind you that the management non-union furlough days were included in the section up above. Okay. And then we get, and this can be, excuse me, if we can go back up, just the certificated, no, I'm right, we're good, Brandon, I'm sorry, I got confused there. The furlough days, I can't include in the June 16th budget because we won't know that in time, but that would be part of the 45-day revise should that come through, and we can add it to the budget then. And then we have all kinds of conversations ongoing. As Chris Canelake let us know about the summer layoffs, whether that window opens or not, that will open a whole discussion of how that could be looked at to help write our budget. And then we need to look at how we're going to run school in the fall. Will it allow us to make changes? Will it add expenditures to our budget? We don't know, but that is something, as we find out, we'll be adjusting the budget. As I mentioned before, we're going to hear August, September in that area, more changes of the budget coming from the state. We'll make changes as those come through. And then there's the discussions we've had consistently and will continue to have, and maybe we can really begin to implement long-term strategies for ideas for both decreasing costs and increasing revenues. But again, that's long-term. Those would things that maybe we could hit the budget with the second year out or possibly the third year. Any questions? Any comments?
Go ahead, Rich.
Lois, I've heard from some associates up in Sacramento, not with education, but that there's some discussion amongst the governor and the whole group that they might look at, because of the health issues of folks that are maybe my age, a little bit older, teaching with the virus and what have you, that they're maybe looking at having some folks retire early, and the state might credit them some years of service. That might be some budget help options. Have you heard anything like that?
I have not. That's very interesting.
Okay. I'd heard that last week somewhere, and not somewhere, I know where I heard it, but anyhow, I just didn't know if that had made it down any further than just that discussion.
What age cutoff are they looking at?
I don't know that, but I'm 59, and the person who told me, says, if you were a teacher, you might have got out of here. So I'm assuming it's 59, 60. I think the health department, they've been mentioning that folks age 60 and above might be more susceptible to catching the coronavirus. And so I didn't know if that was some, but you haven't heard about it, and other people, Eric shook his head no too, I think so. Maybe it hasn't come down yet, or maybe it's not coming down at all. So
I haven't heard about a statewide program. A lot of districts will do a retirement incentive to try to save costs, because an experienced teacher at the top of the salary schedule makes dramatically more than a new teacher. So if you give an extra bonus or pay medical for future years and things like that, you can save quite a bit of money. But I haven't heard about a statewide project or a countywide project or anything like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Bill, you had your hand up earlier. Are you ready to comment?
Thank you, Lois, for that brief. Could we go back to the reduction scenario 4 slide, Brandon, which is, I think, 2 or 3 from the end? And then I want to come back to you, Lois.
I'll stick around.
You ain't going nowhere. Yeah. So it was the one that had the one before that. That's it. So when you were talking, I was trying to do math with my little adding machine on my phone, and that 3.167 the first year, then 2.864 the second year, and 2.864 the third year, which is generally, I think, what you had portrayed, gets us to about 6.6 million in the bottom, just about 3.0, and a minus 742,000 in year three. I share that because as I've been thinking about this a great deal, our 3-year budgets with the shadow and heavy hand of the state that if we're not in a positive with our 3% reserve in year three, are planning tools really for the second year and really for the third year. But for our staff and our students, they are absolutely action steps for August, right? What we decide is going to have impact in 2.5 months. In year two and year three, it gets a little bit more murky. But I just wanted to share that with one line without the compounding of additional items. And what was portrayed here, we go from 3 in the middle to minus 742. So I think it's a good start. I'm concerned it doesn't get us as far as we need to. My biggest concern, Lois, is you keep talking about the June 16th budget. My understanding is we have to have the budget adopted by the 30th. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think it needs to be done at a regular meeting, or can it be done at a special meeting?
No, it has to be done at a regular meeting.
Okay. There are, to me, way too many uncertainties that on the 16th we'll have a sense if the legislature passes and the governor signs the budget that Friday or maybe the day before on the 15th. Why couldn't we have at the regular meeting that's scheduled for June 30th, as we spent time post-Budget Act after June 15th, the budget with a number of scenarios and contingencies worked out to say if this is what comes down, we can adapt to those hard numbers and actually do the adoption of the budget on June 30th. It just seems to me
you will adopt the budget on June 30th.
Okay.
What happens on June 16th is the public hearing.
Okay.
We're required to have a public hearing before we adopt the budget. And we've gone through, it's already said, it's been advertised that the 16th
I understand.
would be the public hearing. And in my mind, we're bound, the public hearing is an opportunity for the public to make comments on the budget we're going to put out. So it should be basically what we're going to do. In my mind, it's a far stretch to try and match our budget to the governor's budget. That every year we have this issue, and that's why the 45-day revise exists. I personally don't want to live that stress and that not rambling, that's the wrong word, chaos to try and go between the 16th and 30th and make huge changes. It certainly is typical that there be some comments on the 16th that would make changes for the 30th, but no one expects us to have as a perfect budget on the 30th. As I've said, it's a fluid document that will be changing all the time, and SCO will not be taking third-year negatives nearly as seriously as they have in the past. They don't have the time to oversee all of that. I plan to, within the narrative of my budget, give possible scenarios of how we will be dealing with any negative number that shows in the third year out, so that SCO will understand the seriousness with which we're taking this and how carefully we're looking at things. They understand that there's discussions that have to happen, timelines that have to be followed. No one should be making these decisions quickly or lightly. So I don't see that as such an urgent need.
The concern I have is we potentially lose that summer contingency layoff period. Not that that is something I even like saying out loud, but it strikes me that when those notices can't be done until it's an authorized step in the budget planning, number one, as if I understood you correctly, and we have, just let me finish, that we have a period of time to adjust. Is it a maximum of 45 days after the budget? So here's what I'm thinking, is we have a change in superintendents on the 1st of July. Could we have a special meeting planned for a public hearing on July 2nd, at which time we're in the revision period, and we can take steps if need be to make adjustment? I hope it's that we are scaling back and the cuts were all, bad dreams and they're not coming, but let's presume it's the other way. Because if we don't act by early in July, we lose that flexibility for the first year. And if the news is catastrophic with the budget, that one tool appears to be taken off the plate, unless I'm misunderstanding the timing. That's why I asked you to explain it a couple of times.
Help me, Chris, but I believe the layoff process, we do the layoff process and then I will reflect it in a budget, but we can do the layoff project and it might not and it may not be reflected till first interim. Most likely we can fit it in the August 15th, but I'm confused by how you're interpreting this.
So I'd like us to spend a little bit more time clarifying, and maybe I need to talk to you directly about it, because I think getting clear on the flexibility and when and how there can be adjustments when a new superintendent comes in 1st of July, and I mentioned my comments at the beginning, I'd like us to plan a special meeting on July 2nd so that Mr. Decker can be, now he has his hand on the rudder in how is this going to go in his view. So how that works, I don't know that we have to sort it out today. I have one other question, though, from a cash flow standpoint that goes to the comment of reserves that were talked about a little earlier. As I understand the governor's proposal, and we'll see what happens in the budget, there is this thing called deferrals that's going to happen. Yes. And that's more of a cash flow issue. And as I understood, June 2020, next month, is going to be deferred. So we won't get the money that we're entitled to until July. Okay. The concern I have is what I had heard in the presentations we've gone to is that the deferrals for school year 2021, at least now, are planned for April, May, and June. Right. And I was trying to think to myself, we pay, I know some people work more year round and they get paychecks every month, but many of the teachers and sort of school year employees get 10 paychecks, right? So that's 3 of our 10 paychecks. I didn't know how much our payroll is, but let's say it's a tenth of $40 million. We're not going to get the money from the state for those. And yet we have, I don't know, 8, 10, $12 million of cash flow problems next spring. We do not have reserves to pay that. So we need to borrow money, potentially, which is going to have interest costs, and we need to weave that into the budget as well. I think from a budget adjustments, I appreciate these belt tightenings you've talked about, but there's an additional cost there. And one of the things we haven't talked about, but I think we need to plan it, we could just estimate what a cost of opening the school is. I think Pete was very eloquent about that. There's PPE, there's masks, and then there's the cleanings, depending on how we're rotating the students through. I don't know if that's 500,000 or $1 million. So probably somewhere in that neighborhood. It's a big number. Well, those are additional costs. So we eat back with interest costs on the deferral and costs of opening. Let's say that's between $500,000 and $1 million. That $3 million one that you reviewed for year one is really a $2 million one savings, right? Because there's other costs related to our conditions. That's the part that I like to make sure we true up on and call them budget adjustments. There are changes in the budgets, our costs, our expenses, our revenue. And I think it's a little more helpful to call them budget adjustments because some are bumps up. I'd ask the question, I don't know, we got 1% addition in attendance. Somewhere I remember that was like $250,000, right? So there's ways.
$1 million.
$1 million.
You always said 1% is $1 million.
Okay. So there are ways we can raise some revenue maybe too. But I think having that a little more comprehensively and really looking at how we might schedule these meetings, I need to better understand what we do between now and the 16th. I know you had asked that we decide by the 9th. I don't know that we're going to be ready to decide by the 9th. I would imagine we'll meet again next week and then probably meet at least one more time then. But having the board and all of everybody who's on this call really think through how can we best deal with the most accurate information as thoroughly and rapidly as we can, right? Cutting too heavily on the front end is, I get that. However, we're going to have hard budget numbers in about 3 or 4 weeks, right? The state will have acted. And then we're not going to be guessing like we are now as much, right? We have projections now. So anyway, just a couple of thoughts, but I think we have broader, in my view, process conversations that need to go on, and getting to the folks. I see these are adults that are being largely affected. One of the things we have not started to talk about is what are the program and policy priorities from some of our educational services that we have. At some point when we get to $1 million or $2 million or $3 million, we need to be making some evaluations there, I think, too. So those are my comments. Thanks.
One thing I would kind of follow up with that, Bill, and the rest of you watching. Earlier, I heard a webinar regarding the budget situation, and the deferment situation was very strongly talked about. And a specific question came up is, where can you borrow that money from? And one of the answers was, you can borrow it from a bond. So we have lots of money left potentially in our bond for future uses. So we will not need to take an investment to where we need to pay interest on a loan. We can potentially borrow from ourselves, pay that bond back when the state pays us, and that would be a benefit. I'm not saying we have to do that, but that helps us a bit.
That's tremendous news. I had never heard that before.
I'll comment.
And I will, can I just
Go ahead,
clarify a bit? We have to have the cash in the bond fund, obviously, and we have some big projects, especially Maddie, that will be commencing over the next year. So it's not clear how much would be there for us to borrow. But yes, we are. That's what we've done in the past when we've had negative dips. We go to the bond fund.
I wanted to thank Trustee Adams for his comments on process, and also to let the rest of the board know that I requested a special meeting for June 2nd. And I believe that is in the works in terms of scheduling, because I think we just need as much time as possible to revisit all of these items and to flesh things out and to get into more in-depth conversations on, I think, policy, which is what Trustee Adams mentioned right at the end of his comments. So I think the more, and I think even Trustee Carnation mentioned this earlier, meeting more frequently with kind of smaller agendas, I think would be very appreciated. It enables us to get feedback from the community and to think things through. And I think we are just getting through this list. So to make decisions based on just having kind of walked through it for the first time, I wouldn't feel very good about that. But if we had some more time to meet and discuss and to bring in some other aspects of the conversation, I think that would be great.
I have a comment. I think this is the second time we're meeting on some of these cuts. And I think that if we could make some cuts tonight, that would be great, and moving it forward. Otherwise, all we're doing is kicking the can down the road for 2 or 3 more meetings. I mean, maybe that's what we want to do. I don't know. But it might make more sense and ease the burden on Lois in terms of her preparing the budget to make some cuts that we agree on tonight, if we agree, and make future cuts at future meetings. Otherwise, we're going to just go over the same list over and over. But I do agree with Bill's comments about process. We need to know what our options are. If the state does allow those summer certificated layoffs, what are the steps? Because if we don't have that figured out now, that time's going to come and go. But if we can make some decisions tonight, that'd be great. If not, I guess we'll just have to keep meeting before we make some decisions. But ultimately, time's going to run out.
A couple of comments. One, on having that the cash flow issue is a big hammer sitting out there on us. So with that in mind, Lois and Trustee Heights, thanks for letting us know about the bond, being able to borrow off of that. So we might want to think about how we have that work done down the road, knowing that we might have to have about $10 million. I think if Trustee Adams's numbers are right? And let's just assume that they are. We're going to have a $10 million somewhere. So if we have to borrow that, we need to look at what our bond cash is. And I think we need to, because right now, unless we know where we're going to borrow that money from, but if we can borrow it from there, maybe we have to stage that process or those construction projects, I mean, in a staged way. So that way, cash flow wise, we would have that money to cover our shortfall, and then have that money when the state reimburses us to pay those construction costs off. So anyhow, that there's some cash flow management that we might need to look at doing. To George and other folks' comment, I'll be honest with you. I was talking to my neighbor today, really awesome teacher, and she said I look a little perplexed because I generally have an answer for almost everything, and I don't even have to think about it too hard. And this has been extremely difficult for all of us, I'm sure, me for sure, because I'm not dealing with my money. I'm dealing with other people's money and other people's incomes and our kids' education. My grandson is getting the education, so I've been, I know what I would do if this was my personal household, and if I was having this personal shortfall. I hear what Pete's saying, and if our teachers are thinking that, hey, we have 1 year of a transition year or a year of some flexibility because of our reserves, they would like us to take that, knowing that next year, if things don't get a lot better, it could be a real severe year. And so I hear that, and Julie, I appreciate her input and everybody's input. So George, to your point is, some of these meetings, I'm still kind of gathering information. I'm still gathering input and feedback from people of how to kind of work this whole thing as a community for what's best for our kids, and then how that works up. And other trustees have made comments too. So normally I don't like a ton of meetings, but I'm kind of more in the let's have more meetings. Let's get this work it out more. Let things fall in place. I don't know that I'm ready to decide anything tonight. I'm still gathering information so that way I can make sure I make a right decision, or that the decision I make is with good information or our best information available at all times.
So I'd like to speak a little bit to the timeline of what we have in the next 30 days or so. We know that we need to have the public hearing on June 16th. That's already been advertised. It's a necessity that's required for us. We will then vote potentially on all the changes or any changes that could be in place on the 30th of June. Brandon and I have already talked, and Stephanie made reference to it, that we plan to have another of these meetings next Tuesday, June 2nd. It hasn't been completely advertised with everybody yet, but we're hoping that that can be attended by all of the trustees and everybody. We usually set aside Tuesdays. So the question for Lois and staff, if we have a meeting on the 2nd, could we again then meet on the 9th? And that gives you, I know that you have to present the information prior to the board meeting. The meeting's on a Tuesday, you have to have everything in by a Thursday or Friday. If we met on the 2nd and maybe on the 9th, would that give you enough time to make some little tweaks in the middle?
Second, yes. The 2nd, yes. The 9th, no. Because once I start putting numbers in, then there's all kinds of things that flow from that to create the whole budget. Once that is all created, between the 16th and 30th, it will be a little bit easier, but still not simple. I mean, the changes would have to be kind of general, one line type things. It's quite a process to create a budget. It's not just putting numbers in. There's all kinds of reports and the narrative I need to write. It's the bottom line is the budget's going to be what the budget's going to be. And if you can't come to a consensus on what we should be putting in as reductions, by the time I need to do to create the budget, then the budget won't have them this time around, but we have August 15th. So if it takes that long, then that's what it will take. I will create as I said, in the narrative, what we're going through, what our timeline is, what we're looking at. I'll use that budget work, the sheet we have now, to show them that we've been giving thought to things. I don't foresee it as a huge problem.
So the 45-day revise you've talked about that happens prior to the end of August, we can make any changes along the way after that, and then it's just not
Yes.
reflected in the 3-year multi-year projections that this county gets on June 30th.
Correct.
And that would give us some time to work with Superintendent Decker some more, and to potentially hear about any of the certificated layoff possibilities, if that's a necessity also.
Yes.
Okay.
But if we don't
Anybody else
agree
have
on
comments,
cuts
George?
Pardon?
Did you have a comment, George?
Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't raise my hand. But Lois, if we don't agree on any cuts between now and June 30th, then that's going to affect our status with the county, right? Either negative or qualified.
Well, my point, George, is that every single district is in this right now, so it's a little bit of a different situation. I don't think they'll look that poorly on us, especially if I can explain in my budget documents the process we're going through.
Okay, that's helpful.
Ms. Ziegler, you have a comment for us?
Yeah, I actually have some questions that, basically 4 different ones. Lois, back in your list of items, the cost of the furlough days was the same in 2021 and 21-22.
Yes, I didn't specify for step and column, but you're right. There would be a slight difference.
There would be something. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Also, in the various scenarios, there's a different cumulative amount of reductions.
The scenarios aren't meant to reflect reality. It was just meant to show the impact of timing. That's the only purpose that
on the ending fund balance or
yes.
remaining balance. Okay, thank you. I know we haven't discussed any revenue, and it came up in the 7-Eleven committee that was also a public meeting, about the town's interest in the Windsor Creek property as a source of revenue to the district. Clearly, the economic situation is affecting the town as well. Is there any update on what that might result in?
That our board can speak to that.
The town is on this.
Well, we had a meeting last night with the town of Windsor. We didn't get into particulars about what it would cost and what it would be charged and what it would be shared. I can't think of the term right now, but the way that we, trade back and forth.
Sure.
They are definitely interested in using Windsor Creek for a temporary police station, for the multi-use gymnasium type building we have there. But it's been the project that they're working on, the town council chamber area, the new hotel potentially, everything's been put on a 12-month deferral. Okay. And so that wouldn't be happening soon. They won't be demolishing the library or Huerta Gym for at least 12 months, it looks like.
Okay.
So that's not really money we have currently.
Right. And I know we're working on factuals and as much as we can. I just didn't know if they were deferring this project for 3 years, in which we couldn't even think about it, as a future item.
Yeah, as of now, from last night, they talked about a 12-month waiting period. I don't know if that'll be extended. I don't know what the developer has in mind, what the county permits, situation has in mind, but we aren't anticipating them using our buildings within the next year.
Thank you. And then lastly, I know we've had discussion and we heard from board members and others, earlier in this meeting about hurting as few as possible in terms of students and employees and jobs. One of my concerns is, and I do acknowledge we have very good relationships with our unions, is the continued erosion of morale if we have to do cuts year after year. And how long can our relationships sustain doing that? And the challenge is affecting too many people too early, and not wanting to maybe go there. So in balancing those ideas, where is the board in preferences for significant early cuts versus waiting and adding yearly cuts, in each year going forward? And so maybe that's because that's a philosophy of how you choose what you're cutting or what you're reducing.
I'll be the first to speak up a bit. The last version we saw from Lois there with all the itemized listed items still put us at a third year where we don't have enough for reserves. So that was making about $3.5 million in cuts this first year and around $3 million the second year, something like that. So it's difficult to look ahead 3 years, but at the same time, we would have a crystal ball to know what the governor is going to say in 15 days or a month and 15 days. We have been hearing that next year, as Rich mentioned, the following school year, because of such a downturn in the economy, that the tax base will be even larger. So they proposed a 10% cut this year, and it may be 15% on top of that for the next year, which means that even if we did make big cuts now, we'd need to make even bigger cuts in the next year or two. I don't like thinking about that at all. I don't want to hurt people's jobs. I don't want to have kids being burdened with larger class sizes and less socioeconomic programs and not socioeconomic, but socio-emotional programs and not having sports or not having enrichment things. It's devastating to think about. But at the same time, if we don't get some federal support and some state support, we can't pay our bills. And the majority of our bills are people. And as hard as that is to think about, we're going to need to make some cuts to people at some point, unless we get some help like a bailout would be that they've done for other industry. And we haven't heard any positives about that recently. So I'll open it to other trustees if they want to comment like that.
Well, I agree with Pete's philosophy is go slow. And then if we need to make larger cuts, then increase over the next couple of years. I was just looking at Facebook right now, and Mike McGuire posted that it's an $8.1 billion cut to K-12 education by the governor. And he posted that he's against that, and he voted against it in the Senate Budget Committee. Whether or not that comes in lower, I'm hopeful that it will. But I agree with a lot of Pete's comments. We can't live in fear. We can't worry about April, May, and June, where we're going to get that money. We have to do what we can with the knowledge that we have now, and hopefully things will get better. But everything does look bleak, and for some of us old timers, we've been through this before. But I would recommend making some cuts to get through this year, and then take it year by year, because it's catastrophic. Even to cut $2 million from the budget is huge, and that does affect students. It does affect staff, even though we always say we want to keep cuts away from kids, but we're cutting people that work with kids. So my philosophy is to go slow, and hopefully things will get better. If they don't get better, then we're going to have to deal with it. But it would be nice if we had all this money set aside for the unexpected costs in the spring, but we don't have that. And we just do the best with what we have. So those are my comments.
Amy, I believe I understand where Pete is, and then but I heard you mention the morale, and that's one of the important things that I'm trying to understand. And so I don't know if I misheard you or if I heard you right, and it might be different from what Pete mentioned earlier. So was your comment that, like, as an example, 3 smaller cuts of maybe $2 million, $2 million, $2 million over 3 years might hurt the morale versus a bigger cut up front now? Is that what, Amy Ziegler, is that what you were saying?
Yeah,
is that what you're feeling, or?
No, I'm not proposing any of those. What I wanted to I'm not proposing to do any of those in particular. It's just a thought I have about what does it feel like when you go back each year and say, now we've cut to the bare, I mean, anything we cut, it's like we're going to cut to the bare bones. And then we have to go back and do that again. and yes, we, agreed, we don't know what is happening, 12 months from now or 24 months from now. So I understand doing what we can right now to address the situation right now. But I know what it's like when we all say, we did everything we could last year, and now you're asking us to do more. And how we move through that together, and we will be relying very strongly on our team sentiments.
So thank you. So Pete, so to come back to that, so do you feel that, and Brad, where I can't see where Brad is, but to Brad and to, oh, there you are. Sorry. So to Brad and Pete, this question is to both of you, and maybe you can ask all of our members, which is the most preferred morale that's going to help our morale in the long term the best? Is it swifter, deeper cuts now, or less cuts now and wait and see, knowing that that next year could be catastrophic cuts if what a lot of the predictions are versus kind of bad and bad? I mean, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what everybody's feelings are as far as how they would hope that things could go.
We haven't had much of a chance to actually discuss it, right? Because we haven't had, we've had a couple of Zoom meetings and everything, but as a union, we haven't been able to get people together to really discuss how they feel about it. My sense is that it is better to cut what we need to make the budget, but not necessarily go beyond that. Because if the longer it drags on, the more people are prepared for bad news, right? In the Great Depression, if you got a job working for 12 months on a project and had no guarantee of future employment after that, you took it because that's what was right in front of you. And that's what we're dealing with here. And so, there's a lot of things that will change. We have an election in November. We have no response yet from Washington about backfilling state budgets. And so my view would be to do what we need to do to try and do some combination, but I cannot see a scenario that works where we just cut and we sit on reserves and don't do anything with the property that we have and tell people, well, you'll be better off 2 or 3 years from now. Because people need stability right now. They need to have a sense of their immediate future. We can do a lot if we sense that there's, okay, this is the first step. There may be more because, all the scenarios involve cutting over 2 or 3 years, right? It's just a matter of how much. I mean, I remember back in the day, the 2008 to 2013 years, we were cutting and cutting and cutting and trying to keep it away from the classroom, but eventually it hit the classroom. And this is a different scenario. This is not because of fundamental economic weakness. This is because we shut down the economy completely for almost 2 months in the United States of America, right? No consumer spending to the degree that we're used to. And that kind of stuff could come back conceivably in the future. If at year 3, we're still fighting the virus and the economy is at 20% unemployment, we're in a deep position, and people will understand if we have to make even more cuts. But at some point, how much can you cut education? Right? It's not like we're overfunded right now. And parents, I think, got a glimpse of what teachers actually do as they tried to teach them from home. And so there may be more support for education now than maybe ever before.
Brad? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm kind of in line with Pete. We had our meeting on Tuesday to try and get feedback to the board, and that's mainly what we concentrated on was trying to offer suggestions, ideas, and comments on how to help you make some of the cuts that are going to have to be made. The other thing we did at our meeting was we tried to rally everybody to start reaching out to their state and federal representatives and say, look, you can't cut education. It's already bare bones. And some of the comments that I suggested was, hey, you can tell them that your spouse has already lost their job because of COVID-19, and now because of the education cuts, you're going to lose your job. So both of you will be on the unemployment line. So it's kind of like, we need to bring it home. We need to be mobilized. And I know CSEA is working to try and get all 255,000 members statewide to start reaching out to their representatives and see if that makes an impact. And that could affect the election in the fall too. So we're going to have to make cuts.
Thanks. By the way, I need to apologize to George. George, I didn't mean when you said we need to maybe see what cuts we do agree on or whatever. I didn't mean that I'm willing to look and listen to everything. I just don't know if some things that are on the table yet or that I am thinking of. I would say that I'm absolutely ready to talk about ways that we can increase revenue right now. I mean, I think we should open up the gates and let every ADA that we can get come in. That's one thing we do have some control over. And so we need to look at board policies to anticipate what we can do in that regard. So anyhow, I apologize, George. If you had an idea or suggestion, I didn't mean to cut it off. I'm still in the get more information mode.
No, I'm not offended. It looks like we're going to need to continue to meet to decide on the cuts. So maybe I have some experience in this and I realize what it is, but that's fine if we move it to June 2nd or June 9th. It's not something that has to be decided tonight. I'm not offended.
Thanks.
So with those last couple comments, and we heard some really good information from our union leaders, I'll get to Stephanie, but we do need to kind of appreciate everybody's time. We are past our timeline tonight to finish at 8 o'clock. So I'll let Stephanie talk, and then we can have some closing remarks about what our next steps will be.
Thank you. And I know we are over time, so I'll be quick with my last comments. Like I said before, I was leaning towards deeper cuts earlier, and I'm now very persuaded that the sentiment among our school district and our community really supports going slow and allowing time to see how the process plays out. And I don't see the harm in having a year in which we're all on notice of kind of what is happening to sort it out, and also really schedule time to have serious policy discussions. If the economy continues to decline, school will change the way that it's funded and potentially. And I think that having that time and the notice that's the work that we have to do, because I don't even think we've really gotten into the work of having policy discussions. We have these line items that we've been looking at, but we haven't really talked about kind of our philosophy and where we want to go and how we're going to adapt to this new environment. So I think there's some value to going slow and working on things throughout the year. My one suggestion for the line by line items that we have listed out is that we as a board vote, or at least say whether we support each one of them when we do make those decisions, because I don't support cuts to the librarian cut and the computer cut. It's just something that I would think would be counterproductive to the environment that we're facing in the fall. I think we will regret losing those two specific positions. And then I really want to quickly call on our student board members, because we invited them here and we have not heard from a single student. And so I think that even though we're running over, if we spent a couple minutes hearing from each one of them, it would be well worth our time to hear the student perspective.
Anna, would you like to make any comments on what you've heard tonight, being very involved in the high school especially?
I'm sure. So mostly on the process of deciding about making either the deeper cuts now or taking it slower, I definitely do agree that going slower is the best option, especially because at this point we have no idea what the economic focus will be in the next few years, and we can't prepare for that at this point. So if we make all those cuts and it turns out that we needed to save some of the reserve, or we needed to keep more money stocked up for that point, I think that that could really be harmful to our budget. So I definitely agree that taking it slower is the better option. Of course, obviously, I think the best option is trying to keep the cuts away from the classroom as much as possible, but I think that's a very obvious, and I think everybody agrees with that as well. I'm really interested to see how the cuts will affect the students, and I'm interested in participating once we start discussing the specifics within what those cuts will be, because of course there will be some cuts made. So I am interested in participating, even though my position is almost to an end. I think because these meetings have been delayed from first in October to then March and to now again, I think that I would like to participate if that is okay, and I can continue coming to a few more meetings, because I do want to be able to keep giving student input from my perspective and from a leadership student's perspective on how these budget cuts can be impactful.
Thank you. Well, Lois has a hand, and then we'll see if Ava is interested in commenting.
I just feel I need to answer to something Stephanie said. I know I made it, I said that we're okay putting in the budget with the negative. I don't think that will be true once first interim comes, that at first interim, they will expect more from us. So I just didn't want anyone leaving tonight's meeting thinking we could let it go all year. That I don't think is an option. If we have several $1 million negative in the third year at first interim, that it will not be a good thing. So we'll know more financially at first interim, but I was afraid that that might give some sense that we could go all year without doing anything. So I just wanted to say that.
Thanks, Lois. And I should clarify that my thinking was that we design a budget that has cuts in later years. So not to say that we wouldn't be making cuts the whole time. It would have deeper cuts that are more severe later on, to be very clear. Thank you.
And we have a new student trustee that's going to be joining us. She'll start next month, but she's here tonight. And if Ava has any comments, we'd appreciate them.
Yeah, I kind of feel like just echoing what Anna and Stephanie and what many people have said, where if you do smaller cuts over a longer period of time, it'll kind of ease at least student morale, because it makes it kind of harder to feel the effect than when it all hits you at once. At the same time, though, if you consider just not knowing what the near future will hold for us, and again, I'm not an economist, so I don't really know how to foresee all that, but I would be open to hearing if there are better opportunities that will be made available to us, if there are harsher cuts made earlier, if it does open up better possibilities for the district in the future. But just from a student standpoint, I feel like, at least morale-wise, which is what I can speak for, going slower will definitely have a more positive impact on the student body.
Thank you very much. So, Dr. Kruger, I defer to you to share our next steps. I think we have spoken earlier, but I want to make sure you let us know what our timeline is going to be and what we could expect next time.
I think you're missing Bill, Eric. He's had his hand up for a while.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bill.
Sure, thank you. A couple of points, just and to request that these maybe steps could be taken so we're ready when we meet again on the 2nd. There are a number of suggestions that have come from a variety of sources that I'd like to see. We're going to do a line-by-line list that the full range of suggestions are there, not the modified list from last week. One of the things that I think would be helpful is, Lois, to take that multi-year projection fluid sheet that you brought for the first time and plug these numbers in so that we can actually see the effect of these. Put in a number for reopening the school, $500,000 or something, so that we can true up what these look like. All right, we've said it would be good if we go slow, but we could do deeper later. You put numbers in, we'll start to see the consequences of those, and I think that would be very helpful. One of the things that was asked about, appreciate very much the CalPADS data that came. We had 15 years of student enrollment. I had asked for the similar period of time for our staffing numbers, if we could get that to overlay as well, so we can see what trends have gone for enrollment and what the comparison is with our staffing numbers. I think what I would hope on the second, when we're talking about proposals for budget adjustments, whether revenue enhancements or reductions or whatever, we need to then be seeing not a scenario sheet. We need to be seeing what does that do to the budget, right? We're at the point that I'm not comfortable that we're addressing that piece of what that looks like on the multi-year projection. So if we could have a few more tangible tools next time, I think that would be helpful, that we can make some of these decisions and assess things a little better.
What about if I can share my screen and have a working Excel document and we can plug and play as you like, or do you want hard copies?
Well, I think having a start, start with yours, right? Put it in there. Let's see what it looks like. Maybe have some others. There's been some other suggestions. I don't know that group editing on a plug and play dynamic multi-year projection is the best use of our time.
Okay.
I think, but having when we talk about the things, having it in the budget, that 3-year, multi-year, so we can see what those consequences are, because I think there will be some dramatic eye openers in that, frankly. And when we have subjective comments of, well, we'd like it to be or whatnot, I appreciate that. I get it. I embrace every person that said that. Where we are now is we need number proposals. All right. Putting in things that go into a budget in a tangible way. I would say, yeah. So I think that I'm just one person. I think collectively working, putting in, hey, if we do 72,000 here and 750,000 here, what does that do? That might be helpful, but I think you can shape it, at least starting the conversation with a multi-year projection populated as is. I just like to have the full range of the suggestions out there, so that if people say, no, they don't like that, or they may like that, what the consequence is. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we are pretty far over tonight. I very much appreciate everybody being here. A lot of positive comments, a lot of constructive discussions. We know this is not easy for any of us. We know that this is not the meeting we wanted to have right now. We know that it's difficult in the transition from one superintendent to the other, and from all the, we can't sit together at a table and do this. It makes it even more difficult. But having everybody's input and involvement helps ease the pain a little bit, and knowing that we're all working towards helping kids along the way and being positive into the future. So Dr. Kruger, can we agree that we'll meet on the 2nd at the same time?
Yes. So we will arrange for the 2nd for another special meeting to continue this conversation and work on getting more information in advance.
Very good. So at this time, with all those things being said, I will take a motion to adjourn tonight's special meeting.
So move.
Okay, thank you, Bill.
Second.
Seconded by Rich. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you all again for attending, and we will read your feedback on Facebook and YouTube. Good night, all.
Great. Thank you. Take care.